Brett Kavanaugh sitting back down again now.
That's possible.
Judge, are you ready?
I am ready. And can I say one thing?
Yes.
Just going to say, I started my last colloquy by saying to Senator Klobuchar how much I respect her and respected what she did at the last hearing. And she asked me a question at the end that I responded by asking her a question. And I didn't, sorry I did that. This is a tough process. I'm sorry about that.
I appreciate that. I would like to add, when you have a parent that's alcoholic, you're pretty careful about drinking. And the second thing is, I was truly just trying to get to the bottom of the facts and the evidence. And I, again, believe we do that by opening up the FBI investigation. And I would call it a background check instead of investigation. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Judge. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. My friend from, I'd just like to say a few words. My friend from Arizona emphasized yesterday that we have before us today two human beings, Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. They deserve, each of you deserves to be treated fairly and respectfully. We tried to do that with Dr. Ford earlier, and I think we succeeded. It's important that we treat Judge Kavanaugh fairly now, and it remains to be seen how that's going to work out. Judge Kavanaugh has been a federal judge for 12 years, and he's been a great federal judge on the second highest court in the nation. He's earned a reputation for fairness and decency. His clerks love him. His students, he teaches in law school as well, his students love him. His colleagues love him. This man is not a monster, nor is he what has been represented here in these hearings. We're talking today about Judge Kavanaugh's conduct in high school, and even then, and as a freshman in college, I guess, as well. Serious allegations have been raised. If Judge Kavanaugh committed sexual assault, he should not serve on the Supreme Court. I think we'd all agree with that. But the circus atmosphere that has been created since my Democratic colleagues first leaked Dr. Ford's allegations to the media 2 weeks ago, after sitting on them for 6 weeks, I might add, has brought us the worst in our politics. It certainly has brought us no closer to the truth. Anonymous letters with no name and no return address are now being treated as national news. Porn star lawyers with facially implausible claims are driving the news cycle. I hate to say this, but this is worse than Robert Bork, and I didn't think it could get any worse than that. This is worse than Clarence Thomas. I didn't think it could get any worse than that. This is a national disgrace, the way you're being treated. And in the middle of it all, we have Judge Kavanaugh, a man who until 2 weeks ago was a pillar of the legal community. There's been no whisper of misconduct by him in the time he's been a judge. What we have are uncorroborated, unsubstantiated claims from his teenage years. Claims that every alleged eyewitness has either denied or failed to corroborate. I do not mean to minimize the seriousness of the claims. Yeah, they've been serious claims, but the search for truth has to involve more than bare assertions. Like Dr. Ford, Judge Kavanaugh deserves fair treatment. He was an immature high schooler. So were we all. That he wrote or said stupid things sometimes does not make him a sexual predator. I understand the desire of my colleagues to tear down this man at any cost. I do understand it. But let's at least be fair and look at the facts or the absence thereof. Guilt by association is wrong. Immaturity does not equal criminality. that Judge Kavanaugh drank in high school or college does not make him guilty of every terrible thing that he's recently been accused of. A lifetime of respect and equal treatment ought to mean something when assessing allegations that are flatly inconsistent with the course of a person's entire adult life. With those comments, Judge, I'd just like to ask you a few questions, if I can, about how, and if you can be short in your answers, it'd help me get through a bunch of them, about how this process has unfolded. When did you first learn of Dr. Ford's allegations against you?
It was a week ago Sunday, one Washington Post story.
Isn't that amazing? Did the ranking member raise these allegations in your one-on-one meeting with her last month?
She did not.
Did the ranking member raise them at your public hearing earlier this month?
No.
Did the ranking member raise them at the closed session that followed the public hearing?
She was not there.
Did the ranking member or any of her colleagues raise them in the 1,300 written questions that were submitted to you following the hearing?
No.
When was the first time that the ranking member or her staff asked you about these allegations?
Today.
When did you first hear of Ms. Ramirez's allegations against you?
In the period since then, in the New Yorker story.
Did the ranking member or any of her colleagues or any of their staffs ask you about Ms. Ramirez's allegations before they were leaked to the press?
No.
When was the first time that the ranking member or any of her colleagues or any of their staff asked you about Ms. Ramirez's allegations?
Today.
I think it's a disgrace between
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Kavanaugh, today's hearing is about Dr. Ford's serious allegations about sexual assault. You have unequivocally denied those claims, but we're here today to assess her credibility and yours. And in our previous vigorous exchanges in the previous confirmation hearing rounds, I found that your answers, at times vigorously defended, but at other times struck me as evasive or not credible on key issues. And it's against that backdrop that I'm seeking to assess your credibility today. You said in your opening that rule of law means taking allegations seriously, and I agree with that. It brings me no joy to question you on these topics today, but I do think they're serious, and I think they are worthy of our attention. So let me, if I can, return to a line of questioning my colleague was on before, which was about whether you've ever gotten aggressive while drinking or forgotten an evening after drinking.
Those are two different questions. I've already answered the second one. As to the first, I think the answer to that is basically no. I don't know really what you mean by that. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, the reason
I don't mean it that way, but no is the basic answer, unless you're talking about something that I'm not aware of that you're going to ask about.
The reason I'm asking, we've had a very brief period of time to weigh outside evidence, and I'll join my colleagues in saying I wish we had more evidence in front of us today to weigh. Do you remember Liz Swisher, a college classmate of yours from Yale?
First, on your point about the outside evidence, all four witnesses.
Well, let me focus. I'm trying to get this question.
I know, but you made a point, and I just want to reemphasize. All four witnesses who are allegedly at the event have said it didn't happen, including Dr. Ford's longtime friend, Ms. Kaiser,
right.
who said
and if Mark Judge were in front of us today to question, we'd be able to assess his credibility. Let me just get through if I can, Your Honor. Liz Swisher is a college classmate. She's now a medical doctor, and I'm quoting from a recent interview she gave. She said Brett Kavanaugh drank more than a lot of people. He'd end up slurring his words, stumbling. It's not credible for him to say he's had no memory lapses in the nights he drank to excess. I know because I drank with him. How should we assess that?
She then goes on, if you kept reading, and says she actually can't point to any specific instance like that.
The quote that jumped out at me was, Brett was a sloppy drunk, and I know because I drank with him. There's also
I don't think that. I do not think that's a fair characterization. And Chris Dudley's quoted in that article. And I would refer you to what Chris Dudley said. I spent more time with Chris Dudley in college than just about anyone. And I'd refer you to what he said.
In other reporting, as I'm sure you know, a college classmate described you as relatively shy, but said that when you drank, you could be aggressive or even belligerent. And your roommate, as I think you discussed with Senator Klobuchar, said you were frequently drunk.
And that roommate, that was freshman year roommate.
Yes.
And there was contention between him and the third person. There were three of us in a small room. And you should look at what I said in the redacted portion of the transcript about him. And you should assess his credibility with that in mind.
Put yourself in our shoes for a moment, if you would, Judge, and I know that's asking a lot of you in this setting. But suppose you'd gone through a process to select someone for an incredibly important job and a position. You had a lot of qualified candidates, and as you're finishing the hiring process, you learn of a credible allegation that, if true, would be disqualifying. Wouldn't you either take a step back and conduct a thorough investigation or move to a different candidate? And why not agree to a one-week pause to allow the FBI to investigate all these allegations and allow you an opportunity a week from now to have the folks present in front of us for us to assess their credibility and for us to either clear your name or resolve these allegations by moving to a different nominee?
All four witnesses who were alleged to be at the event said it didn't happen, including Dr. Ford's longtime friend, Ms. Kaiser, who said that she didn't know me and that she does not recall ever being at a party with me, with or without Dr. Ford.
What I've struggled with, Judge Kavanaugh, is the absence of a fair, federal law enforcement-driven, nonpartisan process to question the various people who I think are critical to this. My concern, should you move forward, is what it will do to the credibility of the court and how that may well hang over your service. I understand your concern about this.
Senator, my
I wish you would join us in calling for an FBI investigation for 1 week to clear or confirm some of these allegations.
When you say a week delay, do you know how long the last 10 days have been for us?
Probably an eternity. But in the Judge Thomas confirmation
for us,
hearing,
every day,
it's a 4-day delay.
Every day, it's been a lifetime. And you know, yeah, and it's been investigated, and all four witnesses say it didn't happen, and they've said it under penalty of felony. And I've produced my calendars, which show, you know, a lot. That's important evidence. And you act like, I mean, the last 10 days, I asked for a hearing the day after the allegation.
Before I call on Senator Lee, I want to emphasize something here, that talking about doing something without enough time. We had 45 days between July 30th and September the 13th, I believe it is, when we could have been investigating this. And in regard to this candidate, if you take the average of 65 to 70 days between the time that a person is announced by the president and the Senate votes on it, is about 65 to 70 days. And here we are at about 85 to 90 days. So there's plenty of time put in on this nomination. Senator Lee. Oh, no, wait a minute. I got one other thing I want to do. Everybody else has been putting letters in the record. I have a letter here from 65 women who knew Judge Kavanaugh between the years 79 and 83, the years he attended Georgetown Prep High School. These women wrote to the committee because they know Judge Kavanaugh and they know that the allegations raised by Dr. Ford are completely, totally inconsistent with his character. These 65 women know him through social events and church. Many have remained close friends with him. Here's what they say, partly quoting the letter. Quote, "Through the more than 35 years we've known him, Brett has stood out for his friendship, character, and integrity. He has always treated women with decency and respect. That was true in high school, and it remains true to this day." In closing, they wrote, Judge Kavanaugh, quote, "has always been a good person." So without objection, I put it in the record. Senator Lee.
Judge Kavanaugh, you've been cooperative at every stage of this investigation, both your background investigation and the investigation conducted by this committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
It's also correct that you yourself do not control the FBI or when it conducts an investigation. You are a nominee. You're not tasked with the job of deciding who, when, whether, or how conducts an investigation.
That's correct.
But at every moment when either we or prior to the committee taking jurisdiction over it, the FBI has asked you questions, you've been attentive and you've been responsive. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Throughout my career.
I have colleagues today who have repeatedly asked for an FBI investigation. And there are some ironies in this. Ironies that ascend at least two levels. In the first place, at least one of my colleagues, at least one of them, had access to this information many, many weeks before anyone else did, had the ability, and I believe the moral duty and obligation, to report those facts to the FBI, at which point they could have and would have been investigated by the FBI. And that could have been handled in such a way that didn't turn this into a circus, one that has turned your life upside down and that of your family, and the life of Dr. Ford and her family upside down. I consider this most unfortunate, given that this was entirely within the control of at least one of my Democratic colleagues to do this. The second level of irony here is that while calling repeatedly for an investigation by the FBI, an investigation over which you have no ability to control, by the way, an investigation you have no authority to call for, while calling for an investigation, we're in the middle of a conversation that involves questions to you. And so I ask my Democratic colleagues, if you have questions for Judge Kavanaugh, ask him. He's right here. If that's really what you want is the truth, ask him questions right now. If you have questions of other witnesses, then for the love of all that is sacred and holy, participate in the committee investigations that have been going on, as you have not been participating, with the committee staff investigating the outside witnesses. If someone really were interested in the truth, this is what they would do. They would participate in the investigation, and when we have a committee investigation, a committee hearing with live witnesses, they would talk about that rather than something else they wish they were having in front of them. If what they want is a search for the truth, then now is their choice. If, on the other hand, what they want to do is delay this until after the election, which at least one of my colleagues on the Democratic side has acknowledged, then that might be what they would do. Finally, I want to point out that there is significant precedent from our former chairman of this committee, Chairman Joe Biden. During the Clarence Thomas hearings nearly 3 decades ago, Chairman Biden made some interesting observations about FBI reports and their role in this process. Here's what he said, quote, "The next person who refers to an FBI report as being worth anything obviously doesn't understand anything. The FBI explicitly does not, in this or any other case, reach a conclusion, period." Those are his dual periods, not mine. I continue the quote. "The reason why we cannot rely on the FBI report, you would not like it if we did, because it is inconclusive. So when people wave an FBI report before you, understand they do not reach conclusions. They do not make, as my friend points out more accurately, they do not make recommendations. In other words, the role of the FBI is to flag issues. Those issues have been flagged. Sadly, in this case, they were flagged not as they should have been, not in the timing in which they should have been. And therefore, they couldn't have been addressed in the manner that would have preserved a lot more dignity for you, for your family, and for Dr. Ford and her family. They were instead held out until the final moment. I consider that most unfortunate. And for that, on behalf of this committee, I extend to you my most profound sympathies, and my most profound sympathies to Dr. Ford and her family as well.
Mr. Chairman, since we don't have enough slots for everyone, can I have the last minute of Senator Lee so that Senator Kennedy can be recognized? Judge, we did 38 hours in public with you. Did we have any private hearings with you?
Yes.
Was that a fun time for you? When senators could ask questions that are awkward or uncomfortable about potential alcoholism, potential gambling addiction, credit card debt, if your buddies floated you money to buy baseball tickets. Did you enjoy that time we spent in here late one night?
I'm always happy to cooperate with the committee.
That's charitable. Were you ever asked about any sexual allegations when we had that time in here with you alone?
No.
Did the ranking member already have these allegations for, I guess this would have been September 6 or 7? And the letter was written on July 30th. A recommendation was made by the ranking member or her staff to Dr. Ford. And by the way, I think Dr. Ford is a victim, and I think she's been through hell, and I'm very sympathetic to her. But did the ranking member's staff, did we hear today, make a recommendation to hire a lawyer, and she knew all of that? And yet we had a hearing here with you, and none of these things were asked. But then once the process was closed, once the FBI investigation was closed, once we were done meeting in public and in private, then this was sprung on you. I just want to make sure I have the dates correct, right? Because we got 35 plus days from all the time that this evidence was in the hands. Recommendations were made to an outside lawyer. You could have handled all this. We could have had this conversation in private in a way that didn't not only do crap to his family, but do all... I yield my time. Trying to see if he could do math about 35 days. That was a little bit of a question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Judge Kavanaugh. As a federal judge, you're aware of the jury instruction, falsus in unibus, falsus in omnibus. Are you not? You're aware of that jury instruction?
Yeah, I am.
You know what it means?
You can translate it for me, Senator. You can do it better than I can.
False in one thing, false in everything, meaning in jury instructions that some of us as prosecutors have heard many times, is told a jury that they can disbelieve a witness if they find him to be false in one thing. So the core of why we're here today really is credibility. Let me talk.
The core of why we're here is an allegation for which the 4 witnesses present have all said it didn't happen.
Let me ask you about Renata Dolphin, who lives in Connecticut. She thought these yearbook statements were, quote, horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue, end quote, because Renata alumni clearly implied some boast of sexual conquest. And that's the reason that you apologized to her, correct?
That's false, speaking about the yearbook, and she said she and I never had any sexual interaction. So your question is false, and I've addressed that in the opening statement. And so your question is based on a false premise and really does great harm to her. I don't know why you're bringing this up, frankly. Doing great harm to her by even bringing her name up here is really unfortunate.
Well, calling someone an alumnus in that way,
well, implying what you're implying about
by a number of your football friends at the time as boasting of sexual conquest. That's the reason that I'm bringing it up. And
yeah, no, it's false. You're implying that. Look what you're bringing up right now about her. Look what you're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that these interruptions not be subtracted from my time.
Yeah, ask your question and then...
She's a great person. She's always been a great person. We never had any sexual interaction. By bringing this up, you're just dragging her through the mud. It's just unnecessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've made reference, Judge, to a sworn statement, I believe, by Mark Judge to the committee. Is that correct?
I made reference to what Mark Judge's lawyer sent to the committee?
Yeah, it's not a sworn statement, is it?
Under penalty of felony?
Well, it's a statement signed by his lawyer, Barbara Van Gelder. It is 6 cursory and conclusory sentences. Are you saying that that is a substitute for an investigation by the FBI? Or some interview by the FBI under oath?
Under penalty of felony, he said that this kind of event didn't happen and that I never did or would have done something like that.
As a federal judge, you always want the best evidence, don't you?
Senator, he has said, and all the witnesses present, look at Ms. Kaiser's statement. She's Dr.
Let me move on to another topic. You've testified to this committee this morning, this afternoon, quote, this whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. Is it your testimony that the motivation of the courageous woman who sat where you did just a short time ago was revenge on behalf of a left-wing conspiracy or the Clintons?
Senator, I said in my opening statement that she preferred confidentiality, and her confidentiality was destroyed by the actions of this committee.
Let me ask you this. In a speech that you gave at Yale, you described, quote, falling out of the bus onto the front steps of the Yale Law School at 4:45 a.m.
I wasn't describing me. I organized, Senator, let me finish here, please. I organized a third-year end-of-school party for 30 of my classmates to rent a bus to go to Fenway Park in Boston, which was about a 3-hour trip. I bought all the tickets. You and I have discussed that before. I bought all the baseball tickets. I rented the bus. I organized the whole trip. We went to Fenway Park. Roger Clemens was pitching for the Red Sox. We had a great time. George Brett was playing third base for the Royals. Actually, he was playing left field that night. And we went to the game and got back, and then we went out. It was a great night of friendship.
I apologize for interrupting, Judge, but I need to finish the quote before I ask you the question.
I wasn't talking about
ends,
me.
Okay, well,
the quote ends that you tried to, quote, piece things back together, end quote, to recall what happened that night. Meaning?
I know what happened.
Well, you...
Judge, will you quickly answer your question, then I'm going to let him answer.
I know what happened that night.
I'll finish asking my question.
Please, go ahead, but do it quickly.
Doesn't that imply to you that you had to piece things back together? You had to ask others what happened that night?
No.
Okay, you take your time now and answer the question.
Yeah.
Then Senator Crapo.
Definitely not. I know exactly what happened that night. It was a great night of fun. I was so happy that it was great camaraderie. Everyone looks back fondly on the trip to Fenway Park. And then we went out together, a group of classmates, and I know exactly what happened the whole night, and I'm happy.
Judge, do you believe Anita Hill?
Senator Crapo. Senator Crapo. Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Judge Kavanaugh, first, I want to get into this whole question that's been bandied back and forth here almost endlessly today about the FBI investigation process. Because I think I want to follow up a little bit on what Senator Lee and Senator Sass have referenced. There's been a lot of talk here about we need an FBI investigation. In these processes, which you've been through a number of times now, when the FBI does a background check with regard to a nomination, could you quickly describe that for us? What does the FBI do?
The FBI gathers statements from people who have information. They don't resolve credibility. They gather the information, and the credibility determination is made by the ultimate fact finder, which in this case is the United States Senate. The committee, of course, here has gathered evidence. And the FBI then gives that report to the White House, if I understand it, and the White House then transfers it to the Senate. Is that the That's my understanding, yes. And as you indicated, it does not do, and it's been said many times here today, the FBI does not make judgments. It gives the Senate committee information. At that point in time, if I understand the process correctly, the Senate, the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, has legal authorities. If it receives information in an FBI report that it wants to further investigate, the Senate has legal authority to conduct further investigation. Is that correct? That's my understanding. And that is what has been referenced here many times about how some of these witnesses that were identified in the very late information that we received have made statements that are under penalty of felony. That's a felony for lying to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And as I understand it,
what happens is the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has authority under law to conduct those kinds of investigations, follows up on the FBI reports to finish out the investigation that it wants with regard to any information that it receives that needs further investigation. Is that your understanding of the process?
That's my understanding, Senator.
Now, in this case, there's been a lot of talk here today, and if I have time, I'll get into it. It looks like I'll run out of time. But in this case, there's a lot of concern by many that there was not so much an interest in an FBI investigation as there was in delay. I'm not going to get to that unless I have time. I want to talk about what happened in the Senate committee's investigation. Because as I understand it, and this may be more of a question to the chairman, as soon as we received information, which was about 45 days after others on the committee received it, we conducted an investigation. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry to turn the question to you, but we began that legal Senate Judiciary Committee investigation.
Yes.
And that investigation involved our fully, lawfully enabled investigators to conduct an investigation. And if I understand it correctly, the Democratic members of the committee refused to participate in that investigation.
Yes.
And so we have conducted the investigation. The very kinds of things that my colleagues on the other side are asking that we tell the FBI to do. This committee has the authority to do it, and this committee does it, and this committee has done it. Now, there may be more demands for more interviews and more investigation, but when you, Judge Kavanaugh, have referenced the testimony that has come from those who were identified as being at this event, the testimony that has been received from them is information that has been received pursuant to a Senate committee investigation. And I just think it should be made clear. I think there's been a lot of back and forth here about, oh, we're not getting information, we're not looking at this, you don't want to look into the investigation, you don't want to see what happened. The reality is that this committee immediately and thoroughly investigated every witness that has been identified to us, and we have statements under penalty of felony from them. So I just want to conclude with that. I got 45 seconds left, so I'm going to just ask you one quick question, again on timing. You had a meeting with Senator Feinstein on August 20th?
That's my understanding. Yeah, well, I had a meeting, and that's my understanding of the date.
Of the date, yes. What was established earlier in testimony here today was that the ranking member's staff helped Dr. Ford to retain the Katz law firm on sometime between July 30th and August 7th. So I just wanted you to clarify one more time. In the meeting that you had 2 weeks or more later, this issue was not raised with you.
The issue was not raised.
All right. Thank you. My time is up.
We'll take a 5-minute break now.
Okay, 5-minute break in the Kavanaugh hearings right now, and we still have ways to go as we are getting closer to the end of this extraordinary day in Washington as the questions continue from both Republican and Democratic senators. Reintroducing the folks we have with us right now. Bianna Golodryga is to my right, as well as CBS This Morning co-host John Dickerson. To my left is Ricky Kleeman, our CBS News legal analyst, and also Jen Crawford, legal analyst, and who's covered the Supreme Court for a long, long time. Jan, what do you make of what we've seen recently here?
You know, they're going back to continue to kind of press on the FBI investigation. I thought there was an interesting exchange with Senator Blumenthal, who, to John's point, John's point earlier was that, you know, the Democrats are asking about the yearbook and what you wrote in the yearbook and your drinking without kind of saying why, the context for that, which is to say, if he's not being truthful about that, we need to know what kind of person he was. Was he the kind of person who would do this? I think it's kind of odd that the person who made the points, of course, when you're talking, to hear Senator Blumenthal say, if you were to lie about one thing, that suggests you may lie about a lot of things. You could admire Kavanaugh's restraint for not asking, well, how was your service in Vietnam? Because, of course, Senator Blumenthal has been not particularly truthful about some of the things in his career. So it was an odd moment, I thought. They tried to do kind of what you were saying they needed to do, probably not the right senator to be saying if you lie about one thing, then you're going to lie about everything else, since he misled on his service in Vietnam.
He also it was the first time we'd heard Anita Hill brought up, Senator Blumenthal mentioned.
Swing and a miss.
Did you believe her,
He
right?
said, did you believe her? And they moved on, so he never got a response. I was struck by two things. One, which is Brett Kavanaugh coming back in and sort of amending his previous remarks, which is saying to Senator Klobuchar, he repeatedly fired back and said, had you ever blacked out? She is the daughter of an alcoholic, as she described, and so he apologized for doing that. The second thing is on this FBI. You know, when it gets into a process fight, you tend to lose people. And so if Republicans in this afternoon can talk about an aggrieved Brett Kavanaugh, who has had his family brought through this awful process, that is a kind of a moral, emotional argument to rally their supporters. The FBI argument is in the weeds a little bit, and just as you're looking at the way this is going to play out in public, which is where this is played, I think that's actually, I think the Republicans are happy to debate the FBI all day long, because at the end of the day, people can't quite follow it. And again, this is not a court of law. At the end of the day, this is a political conversation where people have to defend themselves in the political context. So I think that's how that FBI thing might work out.
Ricky, legally speaking, what has surprised you most about today, or from what we've seen recently?
I think what surprised me was I expected the Democrats to have had numerous conversations amongst themselves, the senators, and to have had an agreed-upon plan that where one senator could build upon another, And I know it's not a court of law, but the themes still ring true. One of the things that we always would say when trying a case, didn't matter which side, is what is your story? That you have to have a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what happened here is the Republicans have a story. And it is about the demise of the character, or the attempted demise of the character of Brett Kavanaugh and his family. And at the same time, that they show empathy as a story with a belief that something terrible happened to Dr. Ford, but it just wasn't Brett Kavanaugh. The Democrats, to follow up on John, the Democrats don't have a story here, and I thought they would. What they have is beating this drum of the FBI investigation, and then occasionally going back to the yearbook or to statements from college to try to show that perhaps Brett Kavanaugh is lying. They have a story. They're just not telling it. And the manner of persuasion, whether it's to a jury or the public, is the public wants to run with your story. It doesn't want to be in the weeds.
And what both sides have to be cautious about is going back to his childhood, or to his teen years in college. You saw Republicans like Senator Hatch say, I can't believe we're relitigating things that happened when you're 16. Not to say that this wasn't a serious allegation, and if true, of course, you know, he should not be confirmed. So they're juggling the accusation and the age of the accused. On the flip side, you see where Democrats bring up certain incidents or yearbook captions and bring up people that are disparaged, maybe, in the yearbook, and you see Judge Kavanaugh flip things around and say, I don't want to drag this person's name back in the mud. Why are you bringing her up right now? You didn't see Senator Blumenthal really come back with a strong response.
Very adept.
Yeah.
It looks like we might be returning to session here, or after a relatively quick break. John, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say on the FBI matter, the Republicans are framing it as delay by the Democrats. The Democrats would argue there are legitimate issues here to figure out whether Dr. Ford was right about this encounter at the Safeway that would put a timeline on what's going on. I mean, there is the political argument Republicans are making. The substantive argument Democrats would respond to say is there are some open questions here beyond merely the testimony that could be wrestled to the ground by a neutral thorough investigative process that would help us determine a couple of these gaps in the story and give us a better fact pattern upon which to base at least our vote or further inquiry.
I want to go to Ed O'Keefe. Ed, if I interrupt you mid-sentence, I apologize if we see Brett Kavanaugh sitting back down again to start taking questions. But Ed, can you give me a quick sense? All right, Ed, we will return to that subject, I promise. Brett Kavanaugh sitting back down, the hearing resumes.
I'm good. Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Kavanaugh, my colleagues on the other side are accusing the Democrats of some sort of political conspiracy, but that's because they want us to distract. They want to distract us from what happened here this morning. And what happened here this morning was that we heard from Dr. Christine Ford, who spoke to us with quiet, raw, emotional power about what happened to her. She said she was 100% certain that it was you who attacked her. And she explained how she came forward, how she struggled with her decision, how she wanted the president to know so that he could make a better choice. So when you and my colleagues on the other side accuse us of ambushing you with false charges, I think we all have to remember Dr. Ford's testimony and her courage. Let me go back to something you just said in your opening. You said you thought at your first hearing the Democrats were an embarrassment. We asked you a lot of questions in those days. And which of our questions do you think were an embarrassment? I asked you about dissents you had written as a judge, an amicus brief you wrote as a lawyer, and your knowledge of sexual harassment and abuse by your close friend and mentor, Alex Kozinski. All valid questions in this setting. They are valid because this is a job interview for one of the most important positions of trust in this country. And earlier you agreed that this process of advice and consent is really a job interview. Certainly not a criminal trial. There's certainly no entitlement for you to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. Are credibility, character, and candor of a nominee things for us to consider in your job interview?
I think my whole life is subject to consideration.
Is that yes? Credibility, character, and candor. Are those specific traits that would be of interest to us as we consider putting you for life on the highest court in the country? Credibility, character, and candor.
Of course, and as part of my whole life.
Is temperament also an important trait for us to consider?
For 12 years, everyone who's appeared before me on the D.C. Circuit has praised my judicial temperament. That's why I have the unanimous, well-qualified rating from the American Bar Association and all the people who have appeared before you.
So you would agree that temperament is also an important factor for
Yes, and the federal public defender who testified to the committee talked about how I was always open-minded and how I'd ruled in favor of unpopular defendants, how I was fair-minded. I think universally, lawyers who've appeared before the D.C.
So the answer is yes. I am running out of time. You know, we only have 5 minutes, so let me get to something else. In your Fox News interview, you said that you, quote, always treated women with dignity and respect, end quote, and that in high school you never, quote, drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened the night before. Would you say the same thing about your college life?
Yes.
So I'd like to read you statements from people who knew you in college. And Senator Coons noted that James Roche said, your roommate, although Brett was normally reserved, he was a notably heavy drinker, even by the standards of the time, and he became aggressive and belligerent when he was drunk. So is your former college roommate lying?
I would refer you to what I said in the sealed or redacted portion about his relationship with the other two roommates, and I'm going to leave it at that. I will say, Senator, you're asking about college. I got into Yale Law School. That's the #1 law school in the country. I had no connections there. I got there by busting my tail in
I feel
college.
insulted as a Georgetown graduate.
Excuse me?
Go on.
I'm sorry. It's ranked #1. That doesn't mean it's #1. And, you know, in college, two things. A, I studied. I was in cross-campus library every night. And B, I played basketball for the junior varsity. I tried out for the varsity. With the first day I arrived on campus, we had captains' workouts. I played basketball every day, all through. And then as soon as the season was over in late February, captains' workouts started again. I was obsessed with
So
being
you
the best
were not
basketball player.
I only have 23 seconds. So you were not as sloppy drunk, and so your roommate was lying.
I will refer you again to the redacted portion. I'll say, look at my academic record, and I don't usually like to talk about myself this way, but in response to you know, I worked very hard in college in my studies, and I also played basketball, I did sports, and I also did socialize.
Excuse me, I know that the chairman is going to stop me, but I do have some other references from people who knew you who say that you were not the basic choir board. But hold on, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Tell us.
I would like to, Mr. Chairman, okay, I'll wait until we finish because I just want to enter some letters into the record. Could I do that?
I wasn't clear that's what you were doing.
I could go on. But, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record 4 letters. One is dated September 18th, 2018 to you from all of the Democrats on this committee. Another is a letter dated September 18th to Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, and Don McGahn, counsel to the president, signed by all the Democrats on this committee. A September 21st letter signed by Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein to the president, and a September 26th letter signed by all the Democrats on this committee, all requesting an FBI investigation, because you did say all we have to do is ask, and the implication being that if we ask, an investigation will happen, and it certainly has not happened. Thank you, Mr.
Without
Chairman.
objection, that will be included. Senator, tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Kavanaugh, thank you again for being here, and I apologize for what you're going through right now. I can't imagine it. I've gone through a campaign and had a lot of smears, but it pales in comparison to what you've had to deal with. I think one point that I'd like to make from the onset, if we go back and review how this committee process has worked, we've got a lot of work to do. We've had members take it on themselves to release committee confidential documents instead of respecting the process. We've had an allegation held for nearly 7 weeks that would have given us plenty of time to investigate. And then when we finally got the information, I invite everybody, particularly the American public, there is an investigation going on. And a lot of it's been documented. There's a chronology on the website that says that each and every time an allegation was made, the staff followed up on it. And sadly, in several different instances, the Democrats declined to participate. They listened in on at least one interview with you, didn't ask a single question. If they wanted to find other leads and other things to do, why not ask? If you're really trying to get to the facts, if you're really trying to do your job to investigate. We're investigating. It's our job. I think in response to the ranking member's question that Judge Kavanaugh said, I'm here, you're asking me questions. But you know what? When the committee staff, I assume, directed by the ranking member, says, no, we're not going to ask questions of Judge Kavanaugh when he wanted to come in and clear his good name, what are you really after? You may not be after the truth. Maybe you are. Maybe you're after executing some sort of a political agenda. Maybe it's a mix of both. But I think you've been treated unfairly, and I'm amazed that after 32 hours of testimony, 1.5 hours I sat in this room, that none of these questions came up when it was all fully known. Lawyered up, as a matter of fact. I also want to go back to the comments this morning. I think I heard, and we can go back to the record if someone disagrees with me, I think I heard Dr. Ford say that she wasn't aware of the fact that we said we'd come to California, we'd make it confidential, we'll completely depose and ask any questions you want to. I think I heard her say she wasn't aware of that. I don't know where that came with counsel or not, whether counsel just neglected to tell her counsel, but the fact of the matter is that offer was out there. We were moving heaven and earth and even moving the schedule to get to the truth. We're doing an investigation. We're doing our level best. I hope that the American people who are watching this will go out to the Senate Judiciary website and take a look at this chronology. Take a look at the lack of investigation on the part of the people who want the investigation. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Every opportunity you have to go and question a witness. Every opportunity that we've had to find more truth, to find more facts, we've done it. It's documented. We've got sworn statements. We're doing our job. We're doing the committee work. Judge Kavanaugh, I also have to say, I believe that you're you're the first major target of a new strategy that's developed here. And I think you're right. I think it's just basically attack, attack, attack. It's not advise and consent. It's search and destroy. And maybe one of the best evidence of this is one of the websites, one of the groups that are out there attacking you and trying to create fodder and all of these red herrings has already acquired a URL for the next judge that they're going to attack. URL's right here. They've already purchased it. They're ready to go. This is the playbook. This is the way we're going to run this committee from this point forward. Take a look at it. I'll make sure we get it out on our website. We've already got a Stop Another Judge who hasn't been nominated URL from the same people that are trying to mobilize people to attack you. There are some people here who may sincerely have concerns. I would tell you to pound the table with your ranking member and the leadership on your side to say, why didn't we ask questions? Why did we listen in and defer? Why didn't we do our part of the investigation while this leader did everything he could to accommodate Dr. Ford and to run down every single lead that's been presented to us? Weeks after it was known to the minority. I look forward to supporting your confirmation. I believe that you're going to be on the bench. You know, as Senator Cornyn said, these are allegations that can be pursued through the courts if they actually rise to a level to where they can be prosecuted. And everybody on the other side of this dais knows that that's not going to happen.
Senator Booker.
Judge Kavanaugh, you drink on weekdays as well in high school, not just weekends. Is that correct?
Weekdays?
Yes, sir.
I'd say that's rare. Are you talking about during the school year?
I'm talking about the calendars that you provided during these dates.
Oh, that's in the summer after a football workout when we went over to...
You drank on weekdays, yes or no, sir?
In the summer, when we went over to Timmy's house on July 1st, that would indicate yes.
Yes, in other words, that July 1st reference to skis, went over for skis, that's brewskis, correct?
And after Tobin...
Sir, I just need a yes or no. That brewskis, right?
Well, I need to explain in context.
You just said, sir, that you drank on weekdays. That's all I was looking for.
Well, no...
If I may ask the next question, sir. You said clearly on the record, I just want you to restate it, that you never in your life, after drinking heavily to the point of throwing up, and again, you said you had a weak stomach, you said you never had gaps in memories, never had any losses whatsoever, never had foggy recollection about what happened. Is that correct, sir? Yes or no?
That's what I said.
Okay. Sir, you also said that this past 2 weeks has been a 2-week effort calculated and orchestrated as a political hit. Are you saying that Dr. Ford's efforts to come forward, to prepare for the very difficult testimony she gave today, to travel to Washington, D.C. and tell us about her experience, have all been part of an orchestrated political hit? And are you basically calling her some kind of political operative?
I've said my family has no ill will toward Dr. Ford. She wanted confidentiality. Her confidentiality was blown by the actions of this committee, and it's turned this into a circus. So, sir,
let's just be clear. In other words, you have problems with the senators that are up here and how we conducted it, but you're not saying in any way that she is a political pawn, political operative. You have sympathy for her. She is talking about a sexual assault. Is that correct?
I said all allegations should be taken seriously. Should listen to both sides. My family has no ill will toward her.
Thank you, sir. Do you wish that she never came forward?
Senator, I did not do this. The witness...
That's not my question, sir. Could you try to answer my question, sir? Do you wish she never came forward?
The witnesses who were there say it didn't happen.
Okay, sir. Do you wish you just remained silent then?
The witnesses who were there say it didn't happen. All allegations should be taken seriously.
So even if it's in the final days before a vote, if someone has a credible allegation of experience that they held for a long time, that person should be allowed to come forward. And in fact, as she said, it was her civic duty. You're not questioning her sense of civic duty, are you?
She did come forward, and then it was.
I know you have a lot of political animus. You stated it very clearly towards my colleagues and I on this panel. What I'm trying to get to the bottom of is you do not see her specifically as part of an orchestrated event. She is not a political pawn.
I don't know her, but I've also said that we bear no ill will toward her. She wanted confidentiality. This could have been handled.
And I understand, but she came forward. She took a great extent.
Yeah.
Your family has gone through hell. Her family has gone through hell. Right. She sat here. She told her truth. And you made the allegation that she was coordinating it. I do not think she was coordinating with the therapist. I did not
say that.
You said this, I'm sorry. So you said that others were making a coordinated attack.
Coordinated by.
Forgive me. You were talking about us, not her. So she was not. She was not doing this for political efforts in 2012 when she talked to her therapist about this attack. She was not coordinating about this painful experience when she made revelations to her husband. She did not coordinate in 2013, 16, 2017, before you even nominated, when she revealed that it was you with 3 different people that had sexually assaulted her. That wasn't coordination. And Lindsay,
all the witnesses who were there say it didn't happen. Ms. Kaiser's her longtime friend, said she never saw me at a party with or without Dr.
And Ms. Kaiser has said clearly, and I'll quote what she said. She said she does not remember the night in question. That supports what you said. But she also says that she believes Dr. Ford. And so my colleague Lindsey Graham, who I respect and have admiration to and has been a partner of mine, he said voting no would be legitimizing the most despicable thing in American politics. Do you think that people who believe Dr. Ford are legitimizing despicable things? Those of us who think she's a credible witness, the allegations against her are credible, do you think that somehow we are engaging in something that's despicable?
Senator, I say listen to both sides before you make a bottom line conclusion, and look at the...
That is fair. I have 10 seconds left, sir. You can answer after I finish. You have 10 seconds left. That is fair. Listen to both sides. This is not about one side being despicable, the other side not. Listen to both sides. She was a credible... I'm going to finish my question. You can answer. She gave credible, meaningful testimony, a woman who had the courage to come forward and tell her truth, sir. And that's what I'm just asking you to say. She is not a political pawn. She is not orchestrating. She is not part of the Clintons' efforts to get some kind of revenge. She is a woman who came here with corroborating evidence to tell her truth.
Is that a question?
No, sir. It was a final statement.
Senator Cruz.
Just on one thing, Mr. Chairman, the evidence is not corroborated at the time. The witnesses who were there say it didn't happen.
No, that's not what
Okay, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Kavanaugh, you and your family have been treated incredibly poorly by Senate Democrats and by the media. And let me say also, I think Dr. Ford and her family have been treated incredibly poorly by Senate Democrats and the media. You have both seen your good names dragged through the mud. And this has been, sadly, one of the most shameful chapters in the history of the United States Senate. Let me say to you and your family, thank you for a lifetime of public service. I will say, watching your mother's pained face has been heart-wrenching as she's seen her son's character dragged through the mud after not only your lifetime of public service, but her lifetime of public service as well. And I know as a father, there's been nothing more painful to you than talking to your daughters and explaining these attacks that the media is airing. I also believe, though, that the American people are a fair-minded people, that the American people can set aside the partisan warfare of Washington and look to substance and facts. And that is the charge of this committee. Now, there have been 3 different sets of allegations that have dominated the media. I think it's important to note that 2 of those sets of allegations had so little corroboration that even the New York Times, which is no conservative outlet, refused to report on them because they could find no basis for them. And it was striking in this entire hearing that not a single Democrat in this committee asked about 2 sets of those allegations. Ms. Ramirez's allegations and the allegations of the client of Mr. Avenatti. Not a single Democrat. I don't know if they were just too embarrassed. Mr. Avenatti's allegations were so scandalous that the ranking member omitted his client's most scandalous accusations of you as a criminal mastermind, essentially. omitted those scandalous accusations from her statement. This hearing has focused, rightly so, on the allegations Dr. Ford presented. And let me say, I think the committee did the right thing in giving Dr. Ford a full and fair opportunity to tell her story. That's what we needed to do when these allegations became public. And the committee treated her with respect, as we should. I do not believe Senate Democrats have treated you with respect. What do we know? We know that her testimony and your testimony are in conflict. A fair-minded assessor of facts would then look to what else do we know when you have conflicting testimony? Well, we know that Dr. Ford identified 3 fact witnesses who she said observed what occurred. All 3 of those fact witnesses have stated on the record under penalty of perjury that they do not recall what she is alleging happening. They have not only not corroborated her charges, they have explicitly refuted her charges. That's significant to a fair-minded fact finder. In addition, you've walked through before this committee your calendars from the time. Now, I will say you were a much more organized teenager than I was, and than many of us were. But it was a compelling recitation of night by night by night where you were in the summer of 1982. That is yet another contemporaneous piece of fact to assess what happened. And we also know that the Democrats on this committee engaged in a profoundly unfair process. The ranking member had these allegations on July 30th. And for 60 days, that was 60 days ago, the ranking member did not refer it to the FBI for an investigation. The ranking member did not refer it to the full committee for an investigation. The ranking member, this committee could have investigated those claims in a confidential way that respected Dr. Ford's privacy. And some of the most significant testimony we heard this morning is Dr. Ford told this committee that the only people to whom she gave her letter were her attorneys, the ranking member, and her member of Congress. And she stated that she and her attorneys did not release the letter, which means the only people that could have released that letter were either the ranking member and her staff or the Democratic member of Congress, because Dr. Ford told this committee those are the only people who had it. That is not a fair process. And we should look to the facts, not anonymous innuendo and slander.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a point of personal privilege to respond.
Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, let me be clear. I did not hide Dr. Ford's allegations. I did not leak her story. She asked me to hold it confidential, and I kept it confidential as she asked. She apparently was stalked by the press, felt that what happened, she was forced to come forward, and her greatest fear was realized. She's been harassed, she's had death threats, and she's had to flee her home. In addition, the investigation that the Republican majority is heralding is really nothing that I know about other than a partisan practice. Normally, all the witnesses would be interviewed. However, that's not happened. While the majority has reached out to several people, they did not notify me or my staff that they were doing this. And so to argue that we would not participate but not tell us what they were up to is somewhat disingenuous. I was given some information by a woman who was very much afraid, who asked that it be held confidential, and I held it confidential until she decided that she would come forward.
Mr. Chairman, would the ranking member answer a question, please?
If I can.
I have great respect for Senator Feinstein. We've worked together on many topics, and I believe what you just said. Can you tell us that your staff did not leak it?
Oh, I don't believe my staff would leak it. I have not asked that question directly, but I do not believe
you know
they
that?
would.
I mean, how in the world could that get in the hands of the press?
The answer is no. The staff
have you asked
said they did not.
Have you asked your staff? Or other
I
staff
just
members
did.
in the Judiciary Committee?
Pardon me? Well, Jennifer reminds me I've asked her before about it, and that's true.
Well, somebody leaked it if it wasn't you.
Well, it was, I'm telling you, it was not, I did not. I mean, I was asked to keep it confidential, and I'm criticized for that, too.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the chairman a question, which is, does the committee have a process if there is an allegation against any nominee to assess that allegation in a confidential forum rather than in the public, since Dr. Ford requested that it be kept confidential? Is there a process for the committee for considering confidential allegations?
And the answer is yes, and I sent Senator Tillis pointed out the document that I put out to show of all the things that we've done along the lines of your question.
And Mr. Chairman, what would you have done if on July 30th the ranking member had raised this allegation with you? As the chairman of this committee, how would you have handled it?
We would have done like we have done with every background, or let's say FBI report that comes from the White House with a nominee, and then subsequent to that, because maybe the FBI got done with it 3 months ago, we go through the FBI or information comes to us, then we have our investigators in a bipartisan way, both Republicans and Democrats, follow up on whatever those questions are or those problems that have to be worked out.
So bipartisan investigators could have investigated this 2 months ago, and it could have been heard in a confidential setting without Dr. Ford's name or Judge Kavanaugh's name being dragged through the body. Is that correct?
And except for 1 or 2 conversations that we had with the judge through our investigators, Democrats didn't participate except in those 2, but in those 2 or 1 or 2, they didn't ask any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
May I respond? It's my understanding that her story was leaked before the letter became public, and she testified that she had spoken to her friends about it, and it's most likely that that's how the story leaked, and that she had been asked by press, but it did not leak from us. I assure you of that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little confused. I thought only the member of the House and Senator Feinstein and her lawyers had the letter, so her friends she might have talked to about it couldn't leak the letter if they just had a verbal conversation, unless she gave them a copy of the letter.
Senator, I don't think the letter was ever leaked.
Well, how did the press know to contact her about her complaint?
She testified here this morning that she had talked to friends about it. They had the letter. And the press had talked to her.
The letter was leaked. Senator, our judge, since there was reference to the problems, the legitimate problems, and the change of lifestyle that Dr. Ford had, if you want some time to say the impact on your family, I'd be glad to hear you. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay.
I've talked about that, Mr.
Okay. Then Senator Harris.
Thank you. Judge Kavanaugh, have you taken a professionally administered polygraph test as it relates to this issue?
No, I'll do whatever the committee wants. Of course, those are not admissible in federal court, but I'll do whatever the committee wants. They're not admissible in federal court because they're not reliable, as you know.
So you've not taken one?
Right.
All 3 of the women who have made sworn allegations against you have called for an independent FBI investigation into the claims. You've been asked during the course of this hearing by 4 different members, by my count, at least 8 times today, and also earlier this week on national television, whether you would call for the White House to authorize an FBI investigation. Each time you have declined to do so. Now, you know, I know you do, that the FBI is an agency of men and women who are sworn and trained law enforcement, who in the course of conducting background investigations on nominees for the Supreme Court of the United States and others are charged with conducting those background investigations because they are sworn law enforcement and they have the expertise and the ability and the history of doing that. So I'm going to ask you one last time. Are you willing to ask the White House to authorize the FBI to investigate the claims that have been made against you?
Well, I'll do whatever the committee wants, of course.
And I've heard you say that, but I've not heard you answer a very specific question that's been asked, which is, are you willing to ask the White House to conduct an investigation by the FBI to get to whatever you believe is the bottom of the allegations that have been levied against you?
The FBI would gather witness statements. You have the witness statements. I
don't want to debate with you how they do their business. I'm just asking, are you willing to ask the White House to conduct such an investigation? Because as you are aware, the FBI did conduct a background investigation into you before we were aware of these most recent allegations. So are you willing to ask the White House to do that? And say yes or no, and then we can move on.
I've had 6 background investigations over 26 years.
Sir, as it relates to the recent allegations, are you willing to have them do it?
The witness testimony is before you. No witness who was there supports that I was there.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, and we can move on. You have said in your opening statement, you characterized these allegations as a conspiracy directed against you. I'll point out to you that Justice now, Neil Gorsuch, was nominated by this president. He was considered by this body just last year. I did a rough kind of analysis of similarities. You both attended Georgetown Prep. You both attended very prestigious law schools. You both clerked for Justice Kennedy. You were both circuit judges. You were both nominated to the Supreme Court. You were both questioned about your record. The only difference is that you have been accused of sexual assault. How do you reconcile your statement about a conspiracy against you with the treatment of someone who was before this body not very long ago?
I explained that in my opening statement, Senator. Look at the evidence here, the calendars, look at the witness statements, look at Ms. Kaiser's statement.
Okay. And then, do you agree that it is possible for men to both be friends with some women and treat other women badly?
Of course, but the point I've been emphasizing, and that is if you go back to age 14 for me, you will find people, and not just people, lots of people who I've been friends with, some of whom are in this room today, starting at age 14, women, and who talked about my friendships with them through my whole life, and it's a consistent pattern all the way through. 65 women who knew me more than 35 years ago signed a letter to support me after the allegation was made because they know me and they were with me and we grew up together. We talked on the phone together and we went to events together. That is who I am. What they've said, what the people who worked with me in the Bush White House, the women there. Look at what Sarah Day said in centralmaine.com. Look at what the law clerks. I have sent more women law clerks to the Supreme Court than any other federal judge in the country.
I only have a few seconds left, and I'll just ask you a direct question. Did you watch Dr. Ford's testimony?
I did not. I planned to. I planned to.
Thank you.
I planned to, but I did not. I was preparing mine.
Our last 5 minutes will be Senator Flake, 1 minute, and Senator Kennedy, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When Dr. Ford came forward with her account, I immediately said that she should be heard and asked the chairman to delay the vote that we had scheduled. And the chairman did, and I appreciate that. And she came at great difficulty for her and offered compelling testimony. You have come and done the same. I am sorry for what's happened to you and your family, as I'm sorry for what has happened to hers. And this is not a good process, but it's all we've got. And I would just urge my colleagues to recognize that in the end, we are 21 very imperfect senators trying to do our best to provide advice and consent. And in the end, there is likely to be as much doubt as certainty going out of this room today. And that as we make decisions going forward, I hope that people will recognize that. And in the rhetoric that we use and the language that we use going forward, that we'll recognize that there is doubt. We'll never move beyond that. and just have a little humility on that front. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Flake. Now, Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy.
I'm sorry, Judge, for what you and your family have been through, and I'm sorry for what Dr. Ford and her family have been through. It could have been avoided. Do you believe in God?
I do.
I'm going to give you a last opportunity. We're right here, right in front of God and country. I want you to look me in the eye. Are Dr. Ford's allegations true?
They're not accurate as to me. I have not questioned that she might have been sexually assaulted at some point in her life by someone, someplace. But as to me, I've never done this. Never done this to her or to anyone else. And I've talked to you about what I was doing that summer of 1982, but I'm telling you, I've never done this to anyone, including her.
Are Ms. Ramirez's allegations about you true?
Those are not. None of the witnesses in the room support that. If that had happened, that would have been the talk of campus in our freshman dorm. The New York Times reported that as recently as last week, she was calling other classmates seeking to, well, I'm not going to characterize it, but calling classmates last week and just seemed very, I'll just stop there. But it's not true. It's not true.
Are Ms. Swetnick's allegations made by Mr. Avenatti about you true?
Those are not true. Never met her. Don't know who she is. There's a letter released within 2 hours of that breaking yesterday from, I think, 60 people who knew me in high school, men and women, who said it was, their words, nonsense, totally, the whole thing, that's totally ridiculous.
None of these allegations are true?
Correct.
No doubt in your mind?
Zero. I'm 100% certain.
Not even a scintilla?
Not a scintilla. 100% certain, Senator.
You swear to God?
I swear to God.
That's all I have, Judge.
Judge Kavanaugh, thank you very much. Hearing adjourned.
About 8 hours and 45 minutes after we started here today with a number of breaks, the Kavanaugh hearings are now over. Joining me here at the table is Bianna Golodryga. Also, we have Ricky Kleeman and Jan Crawford. To end there, we saw Senator John Kennedy, Jan, look at Brett Kavanaugh and say one more time, can you tell me, did you sexually assault Christine Blasey Ford?
And, I mean, he, of course, again, said no. I mean, and ended it very strongly. Starting, I think, if we want to kind of think back about the whole day, as they've now gavelled this closed. The hearing this morning with Ford, starting out with her emotional testimony, her voice almost shaking, saying how she was terrified. And I think that was apparent. Tremendous sympathy as she testified. People saying that she looked credible on both sides. And so there was a moment, as we talked about during the breaks, where it looked like this was a real uphill time for Kavanaugh this afternoon, and that he had to go in and speak from the heart. And so I thought when Kavanaugh began to give his opening statement, when he walked in the room, he looked angry. He looked like a man who has been sitting there wanting to say something, and he said it. And so you could really feel kind of the shift in the room as he began to give his opening statement, and then as the senators on both sides started their questionings. Democrats were never able to kind of get the kind of traction, I think, that we expected. And people were saying at the end of the morning that the prosecutor, that Republicans had asked to do their questions, that she never really was able to lay a glove, as some people were saying, on Ford. This afternoon, it was same I thought, for Kavanaugh.
It was really a tale of two hearings. I mean, I think that after seeing Dr. Ford's testimony, I think that a lot of Republicans were nervous going into Judge Kavanaugh's. I think he came in doing what they had hoped that he would, show emotion. You saw what his family had gone through. He talked about his daughter saying a prayer for Dr. Ford last night. I thought that was a moving point as well. You did see some pushback and some frustration and a bit of anger when his youth came up and his drinking days, and even whether or not he would be willing for the FBI to come in for an investigation. You really saw politicization of the FBI, and that seemed to be a key pivotal player here.
That was the point that some Democratic senators kept returning to, was, you know, asking him whether or not he would endorse an FBI investigation, and he never really bid on that, Ricky.
No, he did not. And he also was not going to get involved in any of their questions or directives to ask the president, to talk to Don McGahn. I mean, he was not going to get involved in anything that was going to prolong his confirmation process.
My apologies for the interruption here, Ricky. I want to listen to John Cornyn. He just walked out.
And I think it's time to vote. The longer that the nomination remains open, we know that more and more of these scurrilous, anonymous, and uncorroborated allegations will be made. Unfortunately, that's part of the search and destroy process that, frankly, I think is an embarrassment to the Senate.
Senator, Flake said that there will always be doubt, and that we'll never move beyond doubt. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's hard to reconstruct.
Okay. So, as we watch John Cornyn walk away here following the end of the Kavanaugh hearings, the president has just weighed in and tweeted. The text of that tweet is as follows: Judge Kavanaugh showed America exactly why I nominated him. His testimony was powerful, honest, and riveting. Democrats' search and destroy strategy is disgraceful, and this process has been a total sham and the effort to delay, obstruct, and resist. The Senate must vote! Exclamation point. If we have Ed outside the hearing room there, I'd love to go to Ed to get some sort of a sense of the timeline now, if there is one, on voting or not. Ed?
Jeff, as we understand it, Senate Republicans, all 51 of them, will meet later tonight here on Capitol Hill to discuss the path forward. As of right now, there is a Senate Judiciary Committee vote scheduled for tomorrow morning, but Chairman Grassley made clear earlier this week, if need be, he would postpone it. Why he would postpone it at this point? Either more credible allegations were to come forward, or perhaps there's some question about the whip count. But even if he were to be rejected by the committee, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he would bring Kavanaugh's nomination to the full Senate for a vote, believing that they might be able to squeeze just enough of those moderate Democrats running in states that the president won in 2016 to vote for Judge Kavanaugh.
Okay, there's a sense of the timing from Ed. Let's listen to Senator Leahy.
It brought me back to memories of Clarence Thomas.
Thanks, Senator. And of course, Clarence Thomas was confirmed.
Go ahead. Yeah, to that point, Jan.
I mean, you saw Senator Leahy saying it brought back memories of Clarence Thomas. That's something I think both sides could agree on. Justice Thomas in those 1991 hearings also equally outraged in much the way that we saw Kavanaugh today, lashing out at Democrats. And ultimately, Justice Thomas, of course, is on the Supreme Court. I thought from what we saw from Republicans today that Kavanaugh will be voted out of this committee. I thought we weren't really sure where Senator Flake might be. His comments suggested that he probably is a yes.
You've spent so much time with so many different Supreme Court justices, Jan, and talked to them, including Clarence Thomas, about that process. When you watch today versus what happened in 1991, how do you compare them in terms of the hearing itself?
Well, setting aside the time, and we all agree the time is different now, and people saying that the woman must be heard, that you didn't hear as much of that in 1991. Of course, it was a different era. But the searing anger the outrage that these allegations by a man who had built a life and tried to do the right thing. I mean, you heard a lot about Kavanaugh talking about how he studied and wanted to get good grades and all that. You know, that kind of indignation that was very much on display in the hearings for Justice Thomas. There was more of a race question with Justice Thomas. He really emphasized he believed he was being singled out at that time in 1991 because he was a black man and he thought differently. He was a conservative, so he must be punished. I think with Kavanaugh today, he believes he's being singled out because the Supreme Court is in the balance, and as he said, Democrats will basically stop at nothing.
Weijia Jiang is at the White House for us. Weijia, we just saw that tweet from the president, the first time he's weighed in on the hearings that have happened here today. We've also gotten reaction from other members of the White House, right?
Yeah, that's right. White House officials were saying throughout the day that they were very pleased with Kavanaugh's performance, that his tone was very defiant and strong, and that's exactly what they had hoped from him, contrasting what he presented recently during a news interview. And you mentioned just minutes ago, President Trump tweeted he had been reserved all day long. Of course, we were monitoring his public appearance when he arrived back here at the White House, as well as Twitter, his favorite way to communicate to the American people. And I predicted that as soon as we heard that gavel that he would release something. And sure enough, right after the hearing adjourned, he sent this tweet, and he used words specifically from verbatim from Judge Kavanaugh, calling this search and destroy, saying this is a strategy brought on by the Democrats, which of course we heard Kavanaugh mention in his opening remarks as well. So Kavanaugh, as well as the president, now painting the Supreme Court nominee as a bit of a victim here. And it's really interesting to note that in this tweet, the president does not mention the victim. You know, yesterday at his lengthy press conference, he said he wanted to hear her story, that perhaps even she could persuade him to change his mind about Kavanaugh's innocence. But he made clear that the burden was going to be on her to do that because he had faith in Kavanaugh and he believed him. And it's pretty clear from this tweet that in his eyes, she did not meet that burden. And so he is standing by Kavanaugh and saying that it's time now to vote. And so a very defiant President Trump tonight, rejecting, you know, not rejecting, but at least not acknowledging what we heard from Dr. Ford, as passionate and emotional as it was, but really embracing Kavanaugh now and focused on getting him approved.
All right, Weijia, thanks very much. You mentioned Christine Blasey Ford. Let's take a look at some of the most emotional, memorable moments here from the past 9 hours from both of the principal witnesses we heard from, starting with Christine Blasey Ford, who in this section is answering a question from Senator Pat Leahy.
What is the strongest memory you have? Strongest memory of the incident, something that you cannot forget. Take whatever time you need.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
The other night, Ashley and my daughter Liza said their prayers, and little Liza, all of 10 years old, said to Ashley, we should pray for the woman. It's a lot of wisdom from a 10-year-old. We mean no ill will.
And there you have it, Ricky, a tale of two hearings.
Tale of two hearings and the advantage to going last. The last memory that goes into the public, if they've been watching, is watching the emotional testimony of Brett Kavanaugh, who really does seemed to be so authentic and so congruent. And his anger and his sadness are all appropriate for what has gone on in his life. And the result of that is that just by laws of rhetoric, what you hear last is what remains with you. The whole point of primacy and recency will always win the day, that we will take away from this a bit of forgetfulness for many people of victimhood of Dr. Ford and move it to Brett Kavanaugh.
You really saw a strategy with the Republicans not wanting to copy what had happened in 1991 by seemingly attacking Anita Hill. They, for the most part, were respectful of Dr. Ford and took their anger and took their hostilities and aimed it towards the Democrats and said, you have politicized this. You have been sitting on this information for so long. You could have taken this to the FBI, to the point where Senator Feinstein at the end had to come out and once again defend her actions, once again defend that it was not her staffer who had leaked the initial letter. So from that perspective, it seems as if, especially given Kavanaugh's performance today versus what we even saw a few days ago on Fox, I think this strategy may have worked for the Republicans.
Well, and in the morning session, they didn't ask questions. They were all deferred to the prosecutor that was brought in, Rachel Mitchell.
Yeah, and I mean, in the morning, there was obviously some confusion where she's asking trying to lay out the facts and kind of methodically taking Ford through what happened on that day as best that she could remember. So there was some confusion. You saw it from the senators saying, I'm not really sure where she's going with this. But what she was doing, and what then I think was very helpful for the Republicans this afternoon, was talking and asking her in a fair and proper way, which then gave Republicans this opportunity to kind of go with the Democrats.
Jane Crawford, Ricky Kleeman, Bianca Goldriga, thank you all very much. So again, after about 8 hours and 45 minutes here with breaks, the Kavanaugh hearings are now over.